Welcome to my show. This episode will take you insight into Kashmir. Kashmir is known as paradise on earth. Kashmir is known for its natural beauty and European weather. It's a tourist destination for many millions. Kashmir is known for its kind, hospitable people. Kashmir is full of rich culture, art, and civilization. Unfortunately, today Kashmir is under the longest siege in our time. I will talk a little bit of history about Kashmir. Kashmir was ruled by Shah Mir dynasty between 1339 to 1561, then fall under Mughal Empire from 1586 to 1751, then fall under Afghan Durrani Empire 1830 to 1846. The history of Kashmir dispute dates back to the pre-independence, because after that, Kashmir, all the region fall under the British colony. British sold Kashmir Valley to then Dogra king Gulab Singh on 16th March 1846. Since then, Kashmiris have been struggling against state oppression and tyranny. India promised the people of Kashmir a plebiscite under the UN watch, but that never taken place. The current situation in Kashmir began on August 5th, 2019, when India unexpectedly abolishes the Article 370. That gave Kashmir a special status. Kashmir now under indefinite stage, digital blockade, continuous curfews. As noted by Ajay Shukla, a defense analyst from New Delhi, this is straightforward pandering to the Hindu majority electorate in India. Kashmiris fear this move will lead to demographic transformation of a region from majority Muslim to majority Hindu. As noted by Ms. Meenakshi Ganguly, South Asia Director of Human Rights Watch, thousands were arrested, including pro-Indian politicians, including former Chief Minister of Kashmir, lawyers, traders, students, right activists. Children were arrested and put in de-radicalization camp. Do you know what does that mean? That's just torture camps. Today, Kashmir is under the longest militarized zone on earth. Indian security forces are in every corner of Kashmir, in front of your house, in front of your mosque, in front of your school where your children goes, in front of your shop where you buy your necessary things. They are carrying assault gun, ready to assault anybody with impunity under the protection of Armed Force Special Power Act. For the last 3 decades, Kashmir has undergoing human rights violation, such as night raids, night home search of civilian houses, random arrest including young boys, enforced disappearance, making off widows, staged encounter, blinding youth by banned pellet guns, organized destruction of houses and properties, and sexual harassment and exploitation. Today, this show, I got 2 specialized people on board. I am proud to introduce Ms. Lee Rheon, former Senator of New South Wales from Australian Parliament, representing Australian Greens. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And we have another gentleman, Mr. Anjum Rafiqi, who is an Australian Kashmiri, who had his master's in engineering from University of New South Wales. Welcome, Mr. Rafiqi.
Thank you.
Thank you for both of you to coming to our studio and participating. So first of all, I'll ask a couple of questions each. My first question goes to Mr. Rafiqi. Why are Article 370 and 35A important for Kashmiris? What is the impact on Kashmiris after this was abolished?
Thank you very much, Anita, for the introduction. It's interesting you brought up the brief history of Kashmir prior to the independence of India, which is really, really important. Kashmir actually lost its independence not with the independence movement of Kashmir of India, but with the coming of the Mughals. That's where they usurped the sovereign king of Kashmir from the Chak dynasty, and they imprisoned him. That's when Kashmir lost its independence and became an entity that has been striving for independence ever since. So that has continued into the current times. That struggle is ongoing. In the modern context, you could say that the independence movement in Kashmir was reignited in 1931, which was with the coming of the Dogras. At that time, the oppressive regime of the Dogras was the people of Kashmir just got together and assembled together against the Dogra repressive measures in 1931, and a mass protest took place. The convening of the protests over time culminated into a full-on independence movement. With the independence of India, the British India at that time, there were lots of pulls and pushes in all directions with regards to the retaining the sovereignty of Kashmir and two other countries as well at the time, Hyderabad and Junagadh. So we are all aware of the independence of India and that of Pakistan, and the undecided situation with regards to three sovereign countries at that stage, three sovereign states, Kashmir included.
Now my second question is to Ms. Lee. Why isn't there any empathy in Australia for human rights violation in occupied Kashmir? How can an Australian politician can raise their voice for the people of Kashmir?
No, it's a very relevant question, because when you look at the big international issues that have taken up human rights, you see that public opinion was an incredibly important driver of change. And to illustrate this very well is the issue around ending apartheid. But first off, how I would answer your question is to say there is the potential there for there to be great support for human rights abuses, ending human rights abuses in Kashmir. People need to know about it, so we need to raise the awareness. That's very critical. But to illustrate that Australians will and can play a leading role in changing these very shocking things that happen in some countries, and most seriously in Kashmir at the moment, is the example with South Africa. In the 1960s and 70s, apartheid was doing shocking things to the people of South Africa. And it's very interesting that when the apartheid regime ended, 5 months after Nelson Mandela was released from jail and apartheid was declared that it was a racist, a very wrong system, he came to Australia. And he said publicly how much he appreciated what Australians, and particularly our union movement, had done in giving a lead to an international movement to say no apartheid. And that's what I believe we need to be working for with Kashmir. We need to build the awareness. The Stand with Kashmir movement is fantastic. It's global. And we need to win more support and more understanding amongst everyday Australians to support that. And that's why Stand with Kashmir actually has issued a public statement, and we invite people to sign on to that, because that helps raise awareness. It sets out the issues, sets out what we need to be doing about that as Australians. So yes, your question is very appropriate, because it's not a good situation at the moment in Australia, but I believe there is a potential for it. And then the second part of your question was, what can politicians do? In many ways it's a similar answer, that they need to be aware and they need to speak out. I was fortunate that I was alerted by a few people, not a lot of people, about the situation. I was given material, so I spoke when I was in Parliament about the situation, and then I visited Kashmir, which was very informative and very disturbing what I saw and heard. So that's what I hope more politicians will do. But being very frank about it, my experience in Parliament is politicians are more likely to do the right thing, stand up for Kashmir, speak up for people's rights, look after the environment, look after workers' rights, when there is strong public opinion. So that's why I come back to the answer to the two parts of your question is we need to build awareness, we need to have a strong public voice that stands with Kashmir and stands for their human rights to be recognised and honoured.
And thank you for that answer. And one thing I have to highlight that Australia is very concerned about human rights violation anywhere else in the world, and we very focus on those things. But as you mentioned, unfortunately, it was not that much intensified about what's happening in Kashmir. There is a lack of information, lack of interest, maybe lack of something else. And at the same time, because Kashmir is world's largest militarized zone, that will change the ecosystem, that change the climate, that change many things, because Australia is more worried about the environment and we have more environmentalists. So this is this Kashmir issue is also because lots of the conflict in Kashmir will have an impact on climate in the entire region. So thank you for your insight. And meanwhile, I will like to show some books written by Kashmiris and non-Kashmiris about Kashmir, and this all it's all available online, or
yeah, these are all available through the standwithkashmir.org.au website.
Yep.
We have basically facilitated access to these books.
Yep.
We have not published these books. Many people have been asking about independent reading material
Yes.
on Kashmir. So we thought it would be best to facilitate access to these books that have been written by academics and independent journalists as well. So yeah, they are available from the website standwithkashmir.org.au.
Thank you. My next question is to Mr. Rafiqi. Would you please share with us the suffering of ordinary people of Kashmir, particularly since 5th August 2019?
Well, the latest bout of terror unleashed upon the colony called Kashmir by the colonizing forces started off or was marked with the mass detention of politicians, activists, children on the eve of 5th of August, when India went about abrogating Article 370. Since then, basically, it is a regime that is trying to force compliance, that is trying to force collaboration with its own agenda, and anyone who steps outside the line is made to bear the consequences. And if we were to elaborate on the consequences, you talked about a whole area being subject to terrifying ordeals. It is quite common, it was quite common, especially in the last part of 2019, for localities to be subject to raids with children being picked up and then subjecting the whole locality to the shrieks of children being broadcasted over the loudspeakers, be it from the mosques or whatever. This has been a reported incident from several reported incidents, especially from the area called Shupian, where quite a few encounters have been initiated by the Indian forces. Talking of encounters, it is quite common for the Indian forces to barge into any locality, barge into any house, and subject those houses to random searches. In a few occasions, those have turned into encounters between the freedom fighters of Kashmir and the Indian forces. The Indian forces leave behind a trail of destruction. As a result, you have seen Indian forces torch houses, subject houses to detonation using gunpowder or whatever. There is absolutely no respect for the rights of the owners of the house or the privacy of the people where they go and conduct searches. The biggest impact has been that on our children. You'll agree that the physical and mental well-being of posterity of our next generation is far more important than anything else. And unfortunately, it's the children that's being affected a lot. Mental trauma, mental stress is on a very, very high rate at the moment. Unfortunately, there have been even attempts at suicide, which is really a indictment on the administration. Suicide in any society is reflective of a deficiency in the society, and Kashmir is no exception. Where 14-year-olds, where 12-year-olds go to the extent of subjecting themselves to self-harm, there has to be something totally wrong, and yet unfortunately that's the case. You'll find that what has accentuated that is the question, and what has accentuated that is children are being subject to a environment which is obviously not conducive for proper nurturing. Imagine instead of being busy with their books, busy with their education, and busy in a playground, they are living under the fear of being subjected to nitrates, being subject to interrogation and being picked up by the armed forces. I can't forget a story that I heard narrated by, and I've probably talked about it before as well, by an Indian journalist when he visited Kashmir in the aftermath of the abrogation. He went into an area and he was told about children that have gone into hiding. Children gone into hiding not because they had committed a crime, but because they had expressed a desire to be free. They were subject to pellet gun firings. Imagine youngsters running away and then being subject to pellet gun firings. Pellets are things that are used by the wider world for eradicating pests. They're not used for firing at humans. And these pellets are used as markers in a way, because what happens at night, then the army or the armed forces of India will go around conducting night raids and searches and looking for everyone who is found to exhibit pellet wounds. That's an indicator that they have been out there protesting. So now we have kids running away, not to hospitals to seek treatment, but running away into hiding so that they are not taken in by the Indian forces. So it's a double whammy for them. Not only are they rendered homeless in a very volatile environment, they are also left to nurture and nurse their own wounds as well. This is just one of the examples. So imagine that kids who cannot go out into the playground, kids who don't have any education, from the period August to March 2020, August 2019 to March 2020, the children of Kashmir have seen 2 weeks of education. 2 weeks of education. So not only have we left a whole generation bereft of their fundamental right to education, we are also subjecting them to mental trauma. Then we have the women of Kashmir. For them, again, the trauma is multiplied by the fact that not only are their children subject to the terror that they are being subject to, the Indian armed forces using rape as a weapon against insurgency, as a weapon of war, is nothing new. It has been documented since 1990s, where in various instances rape was used as a call it punishment or call it a weapon of war against the women of Kashmir. So even the threat, even the fear of rape is enough for any decent woman to recoil and go into a shell. And that enough is to terrorize a person into submission. So as I was saying earlier, localities have been terrorized, and as a result, localities have been forced into submission, so to say. Localities in the aftermath of 370, abrogation of 370, were isolated from each other, and that isolation was continued into this year with internet being suspended arbitrarily, telephone lines being suspended arbitrarily. This report itself talks about it actually gives a trend of how many times the telephone lines, the telephone system has been suspended. This report talks about the instances where the communication system has been suspended. Right now, even though what is surprising is the judiciary of India. The judiciary of India has not been able to give relief to the people of Kashmir with regards to this basic human right of having access to communication and access to internet. So not only has the state of India let down the people of Kashmir, unfortunately, even the judiciary, which is generally seen as the body that you would look up to, irrespective of the political situation within any country, you would expect that the judiciary would be independent. In case of Kashmir, unfortunately, it has been found wanting on account of independence. What is surprising is there are many appeals to the judiciary system that have been left unanswered, as in it is the prerogative of the judiciary to take up a case or to schedule a case. The biggest injustice you can do is by delaying any deliberation on a matter. As the dictum goes, justice delayed is justice denied. So by virtue of just delaying a hearing, be it on the restoration of communications, be it on the restoration of internet access, be it on habeas corpus cases, that delay itself is denying the people of Kashmir justice. And unfortunately, I have to say that the Indian judiciary has been accomplice in this state crime, as I would say. we talk about our industry, the economics of the state. Again, I'll refer to this report in the absence of everything else right now and this being more current. This report talks about job losses to the tune of about 5 lakh people, 500,000 people being rendered jobless. This report also talks about a economic disaster to the proportion of not millions, not billions, but a trillion. A trillion figure is being quoted in this report as the economic loss subjected to, as in for Kashmir. The number of tourists has obviously gone down drastically. So even in the insurgency that was ongoing up to 2019, we still had about 600,000 tourists arrive into Kashmir in the year 2017. In the year 2019, that has suddenly gone down to 43,000. So you can see the impact on a place that, as you said, is known around the world as paradise on earth, and hence tourism is one of the lifelines of the economy of the country. You can see the impact there as well. The general infrastructure within the country, within the state of Jammu and Kashmir, has been allowed to deteriorate. India has gone on a image building spree, renaming of places, renaming of departments is a favorite pastime of the current Indian political government and the government, the BJP. It's a favorite pastime of them, renaming roads, renaming areas, and it's no different within Jammu and Kashmir.
So what I understand from your explanation, thank you for the explanation, because during the lockdown in Australia, due to COVID-19, I have made a show for that, and we found that many people in Australia gone through mental health issues. Even though we have food, we have safety at home, we have internet, we have phone, everything, but only thing we can't step out of the house. That made people mentally, mental health issues. So my first show was about that. So just imagine people of Kashmir locked down with the fear of machine gun outside, fear of rape, fear of picking up your children, fear of raping your woman at home. So what kind of mental health that will be? Just imagine. You cannot imagine, because it is the reality, especially after the abolition of 370. And what from your answer I understand is, abolishing 370 is a first step towards a greater genocide in Kashmir. Just like what happened in 1948 in Jammu, about 500,000 Muslims being subject to genocide.
Yeah.
But nobody talk about that. And at this modern world where we are living in a global village, we can get information within a second. But people are not aware. This first step of abolishing 370 is a larger genocide underway.
Very true.
And I have to explain, this report is not from Kashmir, it's from India. A few lawyers, trade unions, and activists went to Kashmir since August. This report was published in October last year, and I got a copy. It's called Imprisoned Resistance. That tells one sentence I will love to read in front of the audience, that almost all the homes in the villages and some neighborhood in Srinagar have broken windows owing to the stone thrown by army, not by people. The people feel the night raids are not accidental and are designed to terrorize. These night raids, the houses on the street and in the local mosque, these night raids, but also this is accentuated by the practice of torture, not just the army camps and police station, but also right outside your houses, on the street and local mosques. So this is a new report published in October. And my last and final question to Ms. Lee will, what kind of preventive measure can be taken to prevent human rights violation in Kashmir, particularly crime against women and children?
Look, thanks very much for the question. I think it is a good one to finish up our discussion on, and thank you for inviting us here. Look, I'd like to actually start with Kashmiri people, although I'm obviously not Kashmiri, but I think that this is integral to the struggle, and we need to see it in terms of colonial settler society, because that's what India has imposed on the people of Kashmir, which means the people of Kashmir have the right to struggle. Now, I'm not advocating armed struggle, but I find, because people often say to me, why do you support the Kashmiris? Isn't that just allowing terrorists to come into India? And this is part of the narrative that India has built up. And when we're speaking about the rights of the Kashmiris, we need to answer these questions because there's so much disinformation that comes from India. And what we also know, and I don't want, I find it so tragic when I see those young Kashmiris that have been shot by Indian troops, and there's huge funerals for them in recognition of these young men. That's a tragic loss of life. But actually those people have a right to struggle under international conventions. When you've been colonised by a country, people will engage in armed struggle. Now, I've long supported non-violent struggle, but I recognise people's rights. So I did want to put that on the table. And this issue of the way India argues, there's all these terrorists coming in from Afghanistan and from Kashmir, is a way to justify their own takeover. Like, it's very, very dishonest what they're presenting there. I also want to pay tribute to the Kashmiri people who are having their protests. They're taking to the streets with their banners and often met with terrible violence. So we hear very little about that, but it is incredibly important that people, like in Australia, people like myself, politicians, ex-politicians, the general public, become aware of what's happening here and speak up. I think what your question also goes to is what the Australian government can do. And this is where we have the interesting comparison between how the Australian government is handling China with how they handle India. Now, there's many similarities in terms of the human rights abuses. We're seeing the Chinese government perpetrate shocking crimes against the Uyghur people, a Muslim minority community in China, and we are seeing the shocking abuses that the Indian government is perpetrating against Muslim people, not just in Kashmir, but in Assam, right across India. But when it comes to the Australian government, they don't speak out about what India is doing, but they regularly speak out about what China is doing. Now, over the years, the Australian government has put in place a number of measures to monitor and speak out and criticise the Chinese government. So while we've been a strong trading partner with them, we have these regular dialogues where Australia will put on their table their objections to various human rights abuses that are occurring in China and other bad actions that are really against people and the environment, etc., that China is involved in. But again, when it comes to India, and let's remember our Prime Minister, Mr. Morrison, and the Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, just had a dialogue. Even though Mr. Morrison wasn't able to visit, they spoke over Zoom or whatever platform they used. Not a word of criticism of the Indian government, even though this was many months after the takeover of Kashmir in such a violent way, just months after the shocking citizenship laws that came through. We know that India is building all these huge detention centres where people will obviously be treated badly, appalling conditions. Again, not a word from the Australian government. So I think that through our parliament we need to be putting pressure on the government of the day to, as a starting point, bring in a consistency with how we're handling these issues of human rights abuses in China, where we do speak up, we do say what needs to happen and what needs to stop, surely we should be doing the same thing with India, speaking up. So it's not about, in the first instance, trade restrictions or anything like that. It's just the government having a voice and being consistent. If we say we're going to have a commitment, and when Australia likes to boast about how we're committed to human rights, you need to be consistent and bring that into how we interact with the Indian government. But as I said in my answer to your previous question, governments have more courage to do the right thing when the public has a strong voice. So yes, I'll continue to urge my colleagues and new colleagues in the parliaments to bring in these measures. But what I think is absolutely critical that we build awareness within the wider Australian community so people start speaking out about it. And that's why a program like yours is so valuable. It helps add to people's awareness of how serious the issue is for Kashmiris and the crimes against humanity that the Modi government is committing there. And we need to make Australians aware and the world aware. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that answer. And as an Australian first, we should be more aware of and we should be more concerned about human rights violation anywhere, regardless of what is the religion, what is the country. So that is what the core message of this program. And thank you for participation of this. And lastly, I want to say that when it comes to Kashmir, Indians talk about Kashmiris and Kashmir, but let the Kashmiris decide their future, not Indians or anybody else. So let Kashmiri decide. And I want to conclude this and my condolences for those people, victims of the violation of human rights in Kashmir. And because the situation, the international community has to know the geographical position of Kashmir. Kashmir is located in between 3 nuclear power. That's very important. Once this flare up, you don't know it's going to be out of control. And 3 nuclear power, India, China and Pakistan. And Kashmir, the beautiful Kashmir is in between this. So make Kashmir a bridge for peace and prosperous, not a battlefield. Like Switzerland or like something else. For the future generation, make Kashmir a bridge between these countries. Bring peace, and war never going to bring any peace. So don't burn the bridge, what India burned the bridge by abolishing 370. So make Kashmir a bridge of peace in the region, not a battlefield. And that's my message. And thank you for attending. Until next show, safe COVID-19.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.